Good afternoon, and welcome to our online discussion of euthanasia, assisted suicide, and other ending-of-life topics. My name is Amy Hasbrook, and I am the director of Toujours Vivant-Not Dead Yet. TVNDY is a project of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities, and our goal is to unify, inform, and give voice to the disability opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other practices that have a discriminatory and disproportionate effect on people with disabilities. Welcome to our chat. I wanted to go over a little bit our position, just to be clear, because sometimes people get a little confused. Our position on euthanasia and assisted suicide is that it's unnecessary because people already have the right and the ability to kill themselves, and even if they can't physically kill themselves, they have the right to refuse to eat or drink, to refuse medical care, and to have palliative sedation until the point that they die a natural death. Secondly, we feel that it's discriminatory for society to have a policy to prevent the suicides of some people while enabling and encouraging the suicides of other people. So, for example, if an adolescent is bullied at school, we will do everything, and rightly so, to prevent that adolescent from killing him or herself. But if a person with a disability says they want to kill themselves, we'll say, oh, we understand your life is so hard, it's so tragic, you know, we see why you would want to die here, you know, take this pill. So that's a discriminatory way of reacting, and we don't feel that's correct. Thirdly, we don't believe that people have a choice to, clear and informed choice to kill themselves when they don't have a choice of where and how they live. And the practices in our society and the public policy deprives people of the ability to live in the community, oftentimes without personal assistance services, without home modifications, without the support they need to live in the community. How can they make a reasoned and realistic choice in dying? And finally, we believe the safeguards that are supposed to protect people from dying inappropriately, either from being coerced or forced, we believe those safeguards are ineffectual, and that there is plenty of evidence to show that people are often wrongly killed under these laws. So the goal of our online discussion is to give people with disabilities a place to talk about these issues, because the media doesn't address our issues, the issues related to people with disabilities. They discuss moral and religious, or conservative versus liberal perspective. They don't talk about, like I said, those policies that prevent people from living independently. And so this is a place for those of us with disabilities to understand what it's like to be devalued in our society, to talk about these issues and how it affects us. So there are lots of ways that people can participate. First of all, you can join the Hangout on Hangouts on Air. You can go to Google Plus and look at Hangouts on Air, and there we are. You could also go to our website, which is at tvndy.ca, and go to the Events tab, and then select the calendar and select today's date, and here we are once again. Or you can go to YouTube and find us there by doing a search on euthanasia and disability, and there you will find us. Once again, you can join us. If you join us either via YouTube or the web, you'll be able to submit questions there, or if you come online, you can come on the chat. You can talk to us orally and have oral responses either way. And finally, if you hear anything that you want to respond to or have questions about, you can go to our website at tvndy.ca. You can follow me on Twitter at @TVNDY, or you can go to our webpage, which is Facebook page, facebook.com/toujours vivant, not dead yet. So, our topics for today, we really have one major topic, and that is my report on the Disability Rights Leadership Institute on Bioethics, aka Dr. Lib, DRLIB. That's how I abbreviated it. We will also have a couple of news briefs about homicides of people with disabilities and another news brief to come up to mention at the end. But the report on the Disability Rights Leadership Institute that took place this past weekend, so the 5th and 26th of April in Washington, D.C. And this event brought together disability rights activists and autistics who focused on opposing the disability rights community is mostly focused on opposing assisted suicide and euthanasia and on withdrawal of treatment issues, while the autistic community is largely concentrated on genetic selection and murders of disabled children by their parents. So the idea was to bring together those communities and work to toward establishing some of the points we have in common, those being that we are concerned about the devaluation of the lives of people with disabilities, about the need for services in the community, and the danger posed by death-making for people with disabilities, whether that is assisted suicide, euthanasia, murder, or selecting out people with disabilities fetuses with disabilities to be aborted. Selecting as this negative connotation. We agreed to concentrate on each other's issues because we have to work together on all of the issues that affect us all, and the issues that affect people in the disability community also affect autistics and vice versa. So we need to be more cognizant of the other group's issues. There were a lot of sessions, a lot of information was passed back and forth, and some of the sessions included a session by Diane Coleman, president and founder of Not Dead Yet in the United States, who spoke on several topics. One is the rush to judgment. This is where medical staff are in a hurry to disconnect people in a vegetative or other minimally conscious state to improve opportunities for organ harvesting, or just to, decide that the person is dead before there has been an opportunity for that person to recover whatever consciousness they can and whatever ability they can. She talked about national standards, or standards established by the Neurological Association for how long people need to heal from such trauma, and how, on the other hand, how soon people are declared, irrecoverable. So that's one thing that she talked about. The second thing, another point she made, was how medical orders for life-saving treatment are often used to put pressure on people to refuse such treatments. So, for example, the way a doctor might explain such an order is he or she, the doctor, will present the form to the person. First of all, what you'll notice about those forms is that the no answer is always first. So when you're offered a particular treatment, such as a feeding tube, the answer no will come before the yes. Secondly, the doctors often portray the treatment as in a very negative way. So, for example, even though a feeding tube can enable you to continue living, doctors will say, well, you won't be able to taste anything, and it's not it's not very fun and it might give you gas or whatever. They won't say, but this will save your life. And they won't point out the positive things about the feeding tube. Nor will they talk about how people live happily with feeding tubes and don't have a problem with it. So, it's that kind of negative portrayal that ultimately encourages people not to take that life-saving treatment. And so whatever intervention the doctor is describing, people end up saying, well, no, maybe I don't need that, or gee, if it's going to make it worse, blah, blah, blah. And the subtext to all of that is that life with a disability is worse than death. Excuse me. Finally, Diane talked about discrimination against people with disabilities who need transplanted organs. There have been several cases that have come up in the last couple of years where people with disabilities needed an organ transplant of some sort and were refused simply because they had a disability. Sometimes that refusal was cloaked in saying things like, oh, the person couldn't comply with the aftercare regimen or whatever. But it was generally just a cover-up for straight-up discrimination. And so one thing that's happened is people have gone on and done Facebook campaigns or other public campaigns to draw attention, and lo and behold, the hospital has changed their tune. And it's unfortunate when every time this happens, you have to do a big public event to campaign to change the result. And obviously not everybody does the big public campaign, and there are a lot of people who die without organs because they've experienced discrimination. So those were the topics that Diane covered. Another presentation was done by Marilyn Golden, who is an analyst at the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. And she talked about problems with the Oregon's Death with Dignity law and how they can cause abuse, how such problems cause abuse of the law and people die inappropriately. I'm not going to go into that today because we've talked a lot about it in other sessions. If I hear a hue and cry, that will be amazing, but I would be happy to talk about it in more detail later on. But right now, there's a lot of other material to cover. Liz Carr is an actor and activist from the United Kingdom who gave the keynote address. Liz is in a weekly television series called Silent Witness, and she's been an activist with Not Dead Yet UK and a comedian for a long time. And she also was a founder and producer for a long time with a BBC radio program, which is now also a video program called Ouch. And she did a documentary on euthanasia in various parts of Europe and the United States and how the laws are working or not working. And Liz talked about how people with disabilities are an endangered species, and she backed up that assertion with several observations and facts. First of all, that 80 to 90% of fetuses with Down syndrome are aborted. She also talked about the reduction in programs to enable people to live in the community, and that's hitting especially hard in the United Kingdom, where, first of all, they're redetermining people's disability status and deciding that people actually don't have disabilities who do. And, just saying that somebody doesn't have a disability doesn't make it so, nor does it cancel out the discrimination against that person. So even if somebody doesn't have a disability, that doesn't mean they're going to be able to get a job. And it also doesn't mean the person will have any less difficulty doing a job if he or she gets it. She talked about also the increasing number of people demanding assisted suicide or euthanasia for reasons that are unrelated to impending death. And those reasons are getting farther and farther from the original point of assisted suicide. So, for example, there was a woman recently who was given euthanasia because she had tinnitus for several years. There have been several incidents where people have said that they were just tired of life, and so were given euthanasia for that reason. Just many situations where people, first of all, could have committed suicide if they wanted. So this isn't a question of people being unable to commit suicide. This is simply a question of wanting someone else to take the responsibility for that. And so she also talked about an increase in hate crimes against people with disabilities, which is both everything from harassment on the street. She said there are a lot more incidents in England of people with disabilities being called scroungers, and that goes along with the cuts in the disability programs. And, you know, also violence against people with disabilities. And finally, she said that contrary to other animals that are endangered, people with disabilities don't have laws to protect us. So that's, you know, what she mentioned as, you know, things that need to be addressed, and a way of looking at our situation as that of an endangered species. Nicholas Steenhout, who appeared here a few weeks ago, did an interview. He is the director of Living with Dignity in Quebec, and he gave an update on the laws and events in Europe, including the new law in Belgium that allows euthanasia of children. He talked about that briefly. He talked about laws allowing euthanasia that are being seen as a great success and that are used as models in other jurisdictions. And he gave the example of Belgian law that's being used as a model for the Quebec law. He talked about that euthanasia is now being seen as a form of health care. Again, that trend that was brought over to the Quebec law and actually written into the law as a way of getting around the federal prohibition on assisted suicide. And finally, he talked about the number of people who were being euthanized, that it's increasing, as is the number of procedures that do not conform to the law. So, yet, you know, people are still not being penalized for that. We had a presentation from Mary Darnowski from the Center of Genetics and Society, and Sylvia Yee, who was also with the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. And they spoke about reproductive technologies. Some of their major points included that prenatal screening tests are becoming less complicated, invasive, and expensive, even as they detect more and more genetic conditions. And one of the things they said is that soon these tests are going to be available for in-home use, and people will be using them in exponentially greater numbers, yet they won't have any guidance or counseling or instruction on what to do with information they get. And Marcy and Sylvia talked about the fact that companies who sell these tests are also selling the idea that have a child with a disability is really a fate worse than death and could be considered hell on earth. Otherwise, why would people want to buy their tests? So, you know, in marketing their tests, they're marketing the need for the test, and the need is perceived as eliminating disabled fetuses. People could, you know, claim that it's about preparing for a disabled fetus, but really it's about eliminating. If you look at their ads, and the presentation included several ads, it's clear that it's about, you know, not having disability as an issue. Finally, there is already a substantial reduction in the number of people with Down syndrome caused by genetic screening and abortion, and without limiting women's right to reproductive choice, they, you know, sort of left with the open-ended question: how do we deal with this problem? And for me personally, this was a moment of epiphany, realize, because I had for a long time put this issue on the back burner because there weren't that many people who were taking genetic tests. Amniocentesis is the current, what was the current standard for a long time, and it was invasive and not many people did it. Well, now the test is much less invasive. It's very easy, and it doesn't put the fetus in danger, it doesn't put the mother in danger, and it gives very detailed results. Well, so that has increased the number of people getting these genetic tests on their fetuses by, orders of magnitude, and that's going to increase again very shortly when these tests are available at the counter for use at home. And people are going to make decisions about whether to carry pregnancies based on their perceptions about disability. And what we know about people's perceptions of disability is that they're very negative. So that's something that we were also concerned about. We had a presentation by Samantha Crane from the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, who talked about legal actions for wrongful life. These are legal cases brought by parents where parents sue a doctor or a hospital for the birth of a disabled child. And often what happens is that the parents may have some kind of genetic test that either doesn't work out right or doesn't give proper information, and the parent carries a disabled child to term, and the child is born, and the parent, doesn't obviously want to kill the child right out, but then the parent considers themselves, quote unquote, saddled with a disabled child that they didn't want and needs assistance to pay for care to help raise the child. So there are two issues. One is the parent's perception of the child, which is going to be transmitted to the child. And one of the points that they brought up, which I had not considered, is when the parents are spending years and years in a court battle basically saying that the child is incapable of anything and will have no quality of life, et cetera, which they have to do to prove their legal case. That information not only is transmitted to the child, which is bad enough, but it also becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Their expectations of the child become that, and the way they treat the child creates that reality. And so the other problem, of course, is that society is not providing adequate assistance to enable parents to raise kids with disabilities. And so people need to do, or perceive they need to do this to have enough resources. And finally, it's not poor parents who have the money to bring these suits. It's, parents with some means who can, make the investment of time and energy for these lawsuits. And they're typically not the people who really need it the most. So these services don't end up going to the families that need it most. It goes to middle-class families. So those are some of the points that were made there. There were a lot of discussion sessions offered throughout the conference on themes such as effective communication with and through the media. There was also a specific media discussion on relating to abuse of people with disabilities and murders of kids with disabilities. We also talked about, there was a discussion session on fighting the bioethics war. How can we get our point across when bioethicists think that life with a disability is a fate worse than death? How can we be seen as both competent and be taken seriously under those circumstances? And how could our views be taken seriously when that is the underlying belief? And finally, how do we approach ethical dilemmas of genetic technology? As I was saying before, how do we deal with a woman's right to control her reproduction versus the issue of, eliminating a certain class of people, i.e. people with disabilities, people with Down syndrome, people with autism? How do we deal with those conflicts? During the conference, attendees learned of the recent deaths of 5 kids with disabilities, that they had been killed by their parents or caregivers. This added a sense of urgency to the work, and also kind of Um, a lot of us who pay very close attention to this deal with this all the time, and it was nice to, well, nice, it was helpful to share that sadness with a large group of people. It also highlighted the fact that, as Dick Sobsey said, people with disabilities should not be held hostage by a lack of services for parents. And Dick, wrote about this, 20 years ago, where he said that when parents claim that they kill their children because of lack of services, they're essentially saying that if we don't get adequate services, we're going to kill our disabled kids. And so it's essentially holding kids with disabilities hostage. And that was an issue mentioned in the coverage, anyway, of one of the homicides I'm going to mention. Robert Robinson was a 16-year-old autistic fellow who was killed by his mother before she killed herself on April 2nd in British Columbia. And if you look at the press coverage on that, actually that's something I'll do in a future thing, is dissect a few articles on this. If you look at the press coverage on that issue, there was a lot of discussion about the lack of services and how that caused, the mom to quote-unquote snap. That's a very common theme in the coverage of these deaths. But again, as Dick Sobsey said, why, first of all, there are a lot of parents who don't have adequate services who don't kill their kids, and why are we making a special allowance for parents killing their kids when they didn't have services? That's not okay. People should not be killing their kids, period. No excuses. Also, Olivia, Max, and Ben Clarence were killed earlier this month in April, by their mother in England. And the family was well off in this case. They didn't have need for government-funded services. They had personal care. They had carers who came into the house. They had spent more than $1 million, nearly $2 million, in home modifications to accommodate their disabled children. So this was not a situation where care was lacking. This was simply a situation where parents killed their disabled kids. This happens all too often. This is how I came into this movement, and it's based on the devaluation of people with disabilities. So that wraps up my summary of the event. And as I said, I will probably go back through some parts of some bits of material from the event in coming weeks. So please stay tuned. And there will be materials coming out of the event. There were videos taken. There were transcripts done. There will be more materials posted online from the conference, so keep your eye out on our website, and I will also mention these things in our online discussions coming up. I am going to see if we have any questions. I have not seen any questions here, but I'm going to just look over at... No, I do not see any questions, so I will go back and... okay. We do have one news brief, which is that the Carter case will be heard before the Supreme Court of Canada on October 14th of this year, 2014. Now, the Carter case is one that's been bubbling up in the Canadian judicial system really for about 3 or 4 years now. This was a consolidated case. 3 cases came together, and it primarily focused around a woman named Gloria Taylor who had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And she, like Sue Rodriguez 20 years before her, wanted the right to assisted suicide. And the Sue Rodriguez case, in that case, the Supreme Court decided that oh, here's a question coming in. I'm going to select this. Select. Okay, what is this? Okay, well, that doesn't help. Okay, that's a very nice comment. Thank you, Viola. Let's see. So, as I was saying, 20 years ago, when Sue Rodriguez asked for assistance with suicide, the Supreme Court said that though it might violate her rights, the Canada law that prohibits assisted suicide is necessary because it protects people with disabilities. So that that was the decision 20 years ago. But unfortunately, the person who wrote the dissent is now the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And those people, the dissent in that case, felt that people with disabilities should have a right to assistance with suicide, that when Canada decriminalized suicide, that it granted a right, and if people with disabilities cannot kill themselves, they have the right to assistance to do so. So in the earlier version of the Carter case, when it first started out, the judge in the lower court in British Columbia ruled that she found there's no evidence that the danger is the danger to people with disabilities cannot be overcome by a strict series of safeguards. But the appeals court felt that the appeals court felt that the decision in the case 20 years ago, the Supreme Court's decision cannot be overruled by a lower court, that the cases were too similar, and the lower court had no right to basically rewrite the Supreme Court's decision from 20 years ago. So now this case is being brought before the Supreme Court, and as I said, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court right now is one of the people who dissented 20 years ago. So this is a very great concern to us, because we believe that it's very highly likely that the Supreme Court may decide that people with disabilities, despite everything we've talked about, that when you don't have a choice of where to live, how can you have a free choice of where to die? Despite all of that, the court may decide that assisted suicide is a right. So we are going to continue to work on this issue. And what should happen is that even if the court decides to change, reverse the decision from 20 years ago, the court will probably say to the Parliament, you can make a series of restrictions on this practice. Come up with a way that's less restrictive than an outright prohibition. So that will mean we'd have to work with the Parliament on that. So that's what's coming up. And in the meantime, of course, in Quebec, the National Assembly will convene on, the latest date I've heard is May 20th, and will probably reintroduce the medical aid in dying bill. So all that to stay tuned. If you want to reach us, I'm just going to check again on this questioner here. Okay. Well, that's a very nice comment. Somebody just said the comment that I am an inspiration to women everywhere. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I don't want to be an inspiration. I just want to do my work. But be that as it may. Okay, so if you want to reach us, you can contact us through, you can contact me directly at my email, which is tigerlily61, and that's TIGRLILY61 @gmail.com. You can reach me through Twitter, because I have a Twitter feed to follow, which is @TVNDY. You can reach us on our Facebook page, facebook.com/toujours vivant not dead yet, or on our website, which is tvndy.ca. And is there any other way to get in touch with us? Send good vibes. That's a good way to get in touch with us. We are here every week, and you on our website can find old discussions from from when we started last September up through November. We took a pause for a couple of months, then restarted in January. So every week since the middle of January, except for last week because we were away. So you can go to the calendar and check. I'm a couple weeks behind of putting up the discussions, but you can listen to our old discussions in English or French. And any questions that you have about the material, you can feel free to email me or contact me in any other way. I appreciate people listening and hope that this discussion will become more global. I welcome people to ask questions. If anybody has any questions, your time is running out, so please send your questions. We are here every Friday, Friday Eastern Time, U.S. Eastern Time at 3 o'clock. So that means noon on the west coast of North America, and it's still not too late in Europe and also in Australia and New Zealand. It's kind of early in the morning, but hopefully that should work out for most people. So there you go. Please feel free to tune in next week, and thank you very much for being there. Take care. Goodbye.